to the second year of the Tumamoc Author Series in collaboration with the Southwest Center and UA Press. And our first talk today is with Patricia Gilman and being interviewed by Linda Gregonis. Both of their texts are available outside and you can even get them to sign them. So with that, I'll hand it off to Linda.
Okay, my name is Linda Gregonis. I'm an archaeologist that works in the Tucson area, mostly with Hohokam material. I have a master's degree from the University of Arizona. And one of the reasons that I know about this particular book is that I edited it and indexed it because I'm the editor of the University of Arizona Anthropological Series. And the University of Arizona Anthro Series has been going since the UA Press has been in existence. So late 50s, early 60s. Pat's is volume number 85, I believe. And it focuses mostly on the Southwest, although we've done things as far away as Veracruz and other areas like that. And most of the books that we've been doing are archaeology, although I would really like to see some cultural anthropology show up in there too, since our title is Anthropological Series. But right now we're doing some archaeology. In addition to the book that just came out, we're doing one on a site up near Catalina, you know where La Reserve is, development. It's called the Rooney Ranch site. That's going to be out next fall. So maybe we'll have a talk on that one too when we come back. Pima College excavated that. So I'm going to hand it off to Pat now.
And I'm Pat Gilman. I'm an archaeologist as well. I work in the Mimbres area, both in southwestern New Mexico and southeastern Arizona. And I also got my master's from U of A, probably about the same time.
75?
Oh no, 74.
Oh.
And I have a PhD from University of New Mexico. What else was I going to say?
I don't know.
You know, my husband and I just got back from a river cruise in Europe, and we both had a cold, and we're both exhausted, and so my brain isn't working perfectly tonight. But, okay.
So this book is called Mimbres Far from the Heartland. So what I'm interested in is how Pat defines the heartland for Mimbres and what she thinks, well, why she thinks this site is a Mimbres site. I think she's right. and what it means to be on the edge of Mimbres or outside of the heartland in terms of what you're going to find if you find one of these sites.
And I remember now what I was going to say, which is that Linda edited this book, and she said to me, she said, you know, those ceramics tables in the back with all the sherds, and you know, most of those lines don't have any sherds, and you should take those out. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And she was right, by the way. I was looking at the book today. Yeah, we should have done that. Anyway, so the Mimbres Heartland, to me, and probably to most Mimbres archaeologists, is the Mimbres Valley, which is in southwestern New Mexico, east of Silver City, and it runs north to south, unlike the Santa Cruz. And it has 12 or 13 big classic Mimbres pueblo sites. This is AD 1000 to 1130. And these are big sites, 150 plus rooms each. And they're along the river about 3 miles apart each, because it's not a very long river. And they're characterized by big room blocks, that 10, 15, 25 rooms per room block, contiguous rooms, like our houses, but with more rooms, and with Mimbres block on white pottery, which you probably at least have a refrigerator magnet, if not a t-shirt, with a Mimbres design on it. These designs are famous. There's beautiful geometric designs, but they're famous because they've got figurative designs of people and animals often doing things. We may get back to what they're doing. although that's a tangent to tonight. When you get out of the Mimbres Valley, either going east toward the Rio Grande or going west to the Gila and to Powers Ranch, which this book is about, which is across the border here in Arizona on the Gila River, up by Duncan, north of Duncan. The architecture changes so that the room blocks have 2, 3, 4, maybe a few more rooms in them. They're tiny. And there's a lot of them on the big sites. There aren't very many big sites. And for the most part, you lose the figurative designs. And so there's a few. And so most of the black on white pottery is geometric. Very nice, but not what we see in the Mimbres Valley. And so it's kind of they used to be called peripheries, but these people are not peripheral. I'm going to make a case to you tonight. These people are part of the Mimbres culture, and they have, but they have their own version of it. So it's easy to think of these kinds of people. We have a stereotype, I think, among us, that people who live in rural areas today are kind of, behind the times. Maybe they consume our culture, but they don't really produce culture. And they're kind of hicks, But if you think about people my cousins, for example, who live rurally, that isn't true at all. They participate in the larger culture, but they choose what they're going to participate in. And those are conscious choices often. And I would make the case that that's what these people are doing, that they are part of the Mimbres culture. We can talk about that, how that works. But they're also choosing what parts of Mimbres culture to participate in, what parts not to participate in. And they're making their own version of Mimbres culture. So I think that the concept of being on the edge is a good one, and not being out on a periphery somewhere, because that implies something else.
Or are they in an area where there's more than one culture interacting with them? Because if you go farther down the Gila, not too far, go to Safford, for instance, you're going into Hohokam territory. If you go south from there, you're going into a group called the San Simon Madion, who have they have sort of the same house structures as the Mimbres. One of the problems that I think we run into in cultural identity with prehistoric cultures, or pre-Columbian cultures rather, is that we identify them by their material culture. So Powers Ranch, the decorated ware is pretty much all Mimbres pottery. If you go to Safford, you're going to find mostly Hohokam, but a Hohokam and San Simon combination of pottery. So does that mean that they are a combination of Hohokam and San Simon people? Archaeologists define cultures by those material traits. So yes, we are in a territory where most of the people are making that pottery, but is that how they would actually identify themselves?
So that was one of our research questions, was, are these people Mimbres? They are, 70 miles, direct line from the Mimbres Valley, which if you're on foot is pretty far, but not impossibly far. And they're out there on the edge of what's Mimbres. We did know that. And so one of the things we might have expected to see in the pottery was a combination of Mimbres and Hohokam and reserve from the north, and the San Simon red on brown pottery from the San Simon Basin. And that isn't what we saw at all. It's virtually all Mimbres black on white pottery, even though it's so far from the Mimbres Valley. There is, I looked it up today, there are 200 and, 286 sherds of Hohokam, red on buff, or Hohokam plain. There are 68 sherds of San Simon, red on brown. And San Simon's right next door, you know? And there are 68 sherds, same number, of reserve Cibola black on white from the north. And that's it. There are 29,000 plus sherds collected from this site during the excavation in 1983. So, nothing. It's virtually nothing. But you move over to Safford, as Linda says, and into the San Simon, for example, and you start getting a lot of Hohokam, some reserve, some San Simon, even though it's the heartland of the San Simon, you don't get so much of it, and some Mimbres. And so clearly there's different things happening there than at Powers Ranch.
Different interactions. I wonder if you could describe the site itself, because I know we had fairly early pit houses at that site as well as later. And one of the things that I found was interesting in the descriptions of the early pit houses is they look a lot like the early pit houses that you see in Tucson. They're round structures that are kind of ephemeral looking, and you have redware and plainware pottery on them, like you do here.
And probably like you do across much of the Southwest. So, Powers Ranch, when Chet and Mary Bernard Shaw excavated this site, they were both grad students here, PhD students at the University of Arizona at the time. They excavated on this site for 8 weeks in 1983. So they spent a fair amount of time there. And they were interested in the classic Mimbres rooms. And there are between 11 and 13 of these rooms on the site. It's a very small site. And they were interested in those, but it turns out that underneath and to the side of these rooms are these small pit houses, pit structures, circular, with plainware pottery and red slipped pottery. Those structures probably date between 100 and 750 AD, whereas the Mimbres dates from 1000 to 1130. I don't think Chet and Mary expected those, but they did excavate parts or all of 4 of them, which is nice because they didn't have to do that. And Linda was saying to me the other day, you know, they look late archaic, like before you have pottery. They're small and round and not very deep. But we've got radiocarbon dates from 2 of them, and they date sort of in the early AD, CE time period, very early. So there could be some late archaic, but not many projectile points on the site.
And in Tucson, that would be considered early ceramic period sites, or early agricultural sites. So they fit into the context. The other thing that they have in those valleys in that area are trincheras, which are like Tumamoc Hill, with the agriculture that dates to the same time period. So I think it talks to a shared economy at that early period, at least. I think the Mimbres and the Mogollon in general have a little bit different lifestyle than the Hohokam do when they start getting into their agriculture in terms of hunting versus, agriculture, or maybe not.
I don't know.
I know you found a lot of projectile points on the site.
We did. One of the amazing things about the site, there are several, none of which we expected at such a small site, is that there are 167 projectile points. And I compared it in the book to the Maddox site, which is one of the big classic Mimbres pueblos in the Mimbres Valley that I helped excavate in the 1970s. On the Maddox site, we did 4 years of excavation 8 weeks a year, substantial excavation. We have 203 projectile points compared to 167 at Powers Ranch with 11 to 13 structures and only 8 weeks of excavation. So this is significantly different. Very few of the projectile points are the big archaic points, late archaic points that people were using when they were more hunting and more hunters than they were agriculturalists. So most of them are smaller arrow points rather than bigger dart points, spear points. And most of them are broken. Only about 30% are whole. And so they're clearly doing a lot of hunting there, even though our stereotype is that they weren't doing a lot of hunting. And they are clearly bringing the projectile points back to their site, to Powers Ranch, and refurbishing them, taking the broken ones off the arrows, tossing them aside, and putting new whole ones onto the arrows. Something I think is probably a lot different if we looked at it closely than what we're seeing in the Mimbres Valley, in the Heartland.
And in terms of, you had mentioned that the fauna was different from from Powers Ranch than you were finding in the Central Valley. And also, there's a fair amount of shell on that site for the size of the site.
So there are a number of things we didn't expect from Powers Ranch. You know, I remind you, it's a small site and it's out there on the edge. And so we expected it to be pretty ordinary. I did, anyway. So we've got a lot of projectile points. We have some very odd fauna, animal bones. Now, when I say that, and I'm going to list off some of them that I can remember, we've got 1 or 2 bones of each of these creatures. We don't have whole skeletons. We don't have a ton of bones from each one. But we've got things like bear, beavers, skunks. We've got a double-crested cormorant bone. Yeah. Ooh. We've got duck. We've got potential dog, which is unusual. I mean, we think of dogs in the Southwest, and certainly people had dogs, but you don't see their bones very often, at least in Mogollon sites. I don't know if you do in Hohokam sites or not. There's a couple others. Badger. Anyway, some really unusual stuff. And again, if you looked at the faunal assemblage, the animal bones from one of the big sites in the Mimbres Valley, you might have maybe a bear bone and maybe a hawk bone. But you wouldn't have the whole list of things I just listed off. You just wouldn't have that many. And I think there's been one other cormorant bone found in a Mimbres site ever. So pretty weird. Then there's the shell. So, small site. We have 46 pieces of shell. Marine, well, most of it's marine, a little bit of it's freshwater. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a huge amount of, thank you, Chris. It's a huge amount of shell for a small site. And the interesting thing, Arthur Vokes, who's a shell analyst, analyzed our shell, and he noted that there are lots of different forms. When you look at southwestern shell, especially in the Mogollon area, you get a lot of bracelets, bracelet fragments, broken bracelets. Glycymerus it's made out of, which is it's a bivalve, thank you. And you get a few other things, some beads and stuff, but he noted that there are many, many different forms of the shell, many different forms of beads, and other sorts of shell jewelry that you wouldn't expect at such a small site. Linda and I were talking yesterday, and for the first time it dawned on me that this site is on the Gila River, and which comes right through Phoenix and goes out to the Gulf of California. And so where does the shell come from? It comes from the Gulf of California, and it's coming up. Most of the shell at Powers Ranch is already made. They're not making it. They're not getting raw shell and making it. So it's probably the shell just moving along the Gila River there as it would. Yeah. Which might account for why there's so many different forms of it too.
And then this is a little bit of an aside here. The marine shell that you do see in Mimbres sites, I think a lot of people would say is Hohokam origin, Hohokam manufacture. One particular example of that has to do with some shell that was found in a cache of shell that had over 100 pieces that was found near Gila Bend. And in that cache, there are these little figurines of humans dancing that they're very distinct. And I would suggest that they're all made by the same person. I don't know, you looked at that. Chris has looked at that. Chris is a shell analyst, in case you didn't know. We're wondering. Anyway, we found, when they were excavating a site called the Nan Ranch over in the Mimbres Valley, they found a burial with 2 of those figurines that look virtually identical to the ones that were found in Gila Bend, along with other things that were found in that cache, including these really interesting birds that have long beaks and really long legs that are eating snakes, some little star-shaped objects, and other things like that were found in that burial. And there's a similar set of those shell artifacts, that little dancing human, that were found in a site down at Palo Parado on the Upper Santa Cruz. So there was, my theory on this is that there was one artisan that was trading that stuff all over the Southwest and probably traveling around and selling his wares, which is probably how they got over to Mimbres. But you also find Mimbres people mostly inhumated, right? They buried them. And you do find cremations over there as well. That are probably, a Hohokam person that married in or something like that. So there's constant interchange among these cultures. One of the questions that I had on, or something I think we should talk about is, in 1983, that was kind of the beginning of cultural resource management projects, and most archaeologists, including the people who excavated this site, were doing excavations for companies or for state museums in terms of fulfilling legislation. We had archaeological laws that required the excavation of sites before disturbance with federal money, using federal monies or state monies for New Mexico and Arizona. So the people that excavated that site would have been doing cultural resource management during the week and going out there on a weekend. And I've been involved in projects like that too, where you're doing, we call it CRM during the week, and doing your projects on your own on the weekend. So I was wondering how they actually got involved at Powers Ranch.
So Powers Ranch is named for the Powers family. Richard Powers was a medical doctor, as I remember it. And I believe his wife was an artist. I'm trying to think of her name, and it won't come to me. And they had 5 kids, a boy and 4 girls. And one of the girls was a student in anthropology here at the university, an undergraduate. And she knew this site was on her family's land, and she started to talk to her professors about it. I don't know which professors. I don't know. And got them interested in the site. She got them to come out and look at it. And they decided, I don't know quite how, that they would do some excavation there. And Chet told me once that he envisioned the material that came out of the excavation, the information and the artifacts, that some graduate student at U of A, would write it up for a master's degree thesis or a PhD. And that didn't happen. And so, this is slightly a tangent to your point, but I was interested in Mimbres outside the Mimbres Valley, and I knew about this site because I had visited Chet and Mary during the excavation. And so I got a loan from Arizona State Museum of the pottery and the projectile points to take back to the University of Oklahoma to have my students analyze. Because Chet and Mary had not gotten to it because they were busy making a living in CRM. And so they just couldn't do it. But to go back to the story, the daughter, Elizabeth, Liz, convinced people to go out there and take a look around. People from Arizona State Museum, Bruce Huckle, wrote up the site card, for example. And Agnes Howery, who was married to Emil Howery, who is, in my mind, the father of Southwestern archaeology. He's not precisely that, but close enough. And she was married to him as his second wife, and she was independently wealthy. And she funded this excavation. I believe the SHPO's office, the State Historic Preservation Office, also put in some money as well. But the money was only for excavation. It was not for analysis, although they did a little bit of analysis. But it's not like they could hire somebody to analyze the sherds, for example. I have met two of the daughters. The older couple is not, mom and dad are not alive. I have met two of the daughters, including Liz, and I've met one of the other ones on Zoom. But they have all been very supportive, both of Chet and Mary when they were out there, and of us writing that up, and they were very pleased with the book, which is very gratifying to me.
That's good. So you mentioned Mary Whisenhunt, who's your co-author. This is part of her PhD work,
Yes.
right? Yeah. So I wonder if you could speak to the survey that she did in the Gila Valley and how you talked her into doing powers for that.
So this is a different Mary. This is Mary Whisenhunt, who had a career in the Army as an intelligence officer and retired and went back to something she also loved. I hope she loved her job, but which is archaeology. And she earned a PhD at the University of Texas in San Antonio as an older student, a non-traditional student. I think her PhD is 2020. So she was out there with another project, and she did a survey. The other project was excavating one of the trinchera sites, among other things. Yeah, out there. And so Mary was doing survey about a little bit south of and upriver from Powers Ranch, along the Gila River. And I knew she found some Mimbres sites out there, and I thought, I can get her, I have her dissertation, I could write something on this, you know, but I really don't want to delve into all of her data. And so I asked her if she would like to work with me on this. And at first we were thinking an article, you know, but then I said, you know, there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of data, a lot of information. And so we ended up with the book. And she provided her survey information, she wrote it, that part of the book, and the ceramics from the survey. And so what we were able to say was that Powers Ranch out there on the edge is not unique. I mean, you might think, okay, this is just a group of Mimbres people who got kicked out of the Mimbres Valley, and they had to move someplace, and they moved out there, and there's nobody else around them. no other Mimbres people. But that's not true at all. There are other Mimbres sites, there's 12 of them that she recorded up and down the Gila. And there are, I'm sure, many more out there. They're all small, like Powers Ranch. Given how Powers Ranch has all of those unique things that I was talking about, apparently unique, I wonder what else is out there, that might be different. I have no idea. And of course, most of those sites have been heavily potted, heavily damaged. And Mary worked with some of the, how shall I say it, most intensive pot hunters in the Southwest out there. They were mostly focused on the later Salado sites that have the beautiful polychrome vessels, black and white and red. And she worked with them. They trusted her, they trust her, and they showed her, most of them had sold their collections, because that's what they were doing this for. But they had pictures, and they have incredible memories of where they excavated, dug things up. And so she has copies of all their photos of all the bowls. So she has pictures of numerous bowls from these sites. And so what I said about very few figuratives, when you look at their pictures, there's quite a few figuratives. I don't know how to interpret that, because I don't know if they just didn't bother to take pictures of the geometric ones without the figures. I just don't know. Or if this is some sort of more accurate representation of what's out there. There's still not a lot, but there's more than I would have expected. More than 2.
Which is good. The thing I worry about a little bit when somebody's doing collections like that, though, is they trade things around a lot with each other.
Yeah.
So did they actually come from there, or did they come from the Mimbres Valley?
No, I
It's,
think she thinks
You think
they come
it
from
actually
there.
came from there?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
So, because that says something about that family. Do you think that the Powers Ranch and those small sites, were they occupied by like an extended family, or what we would call a clan, or what?
I think Powers Ranch has two room blocks. One room block has 2 rooms in it, plus a couple of small rooms on the side. They may have a couple more rooms too. The other room, and it's very ephemeral. The walls are made of, the bottom course is upright stones, and then flat stones were laid across those. The walls do not look full height, and so the superstructure might have been a brush superstructure. Hard to know, because the other room block that has 6 or 7-ish rooms has these big vesicular basalt boulders that form the walls. Very different from what we see in the first room block. And so one of the questions is, did they take the stones from the first room block, which might have been earlier, and build the second room block from them? I don't think so, but it's a possibility. Or was the second room block just in a different style for some reason, a different group of people? But neither room block is big enough that we would have a huge extended family. I used to call these people families, these groups of people. I was told not to do that, and I'm supposed to call them households, but I think they're families. And we all know that the word family can include lots of people related by blood or marriage or not. I think that the small room block is certainly one fairly small group of people, one smallish family. The bigger one may have been more, a larger group. Unlike the Mimbres Valley, when you look at those big pueblos in the Mimbres Valley, there's a lot of superposition. There's a lot of rooms built on top of rooms. There's a lot of pit structures underneath them. And you see a lot of continuity, you see a lot of remodeling, you see a lot of floors being redone, which suggests that families were living there for long periods of time, which we think they were. And you get a lot of rooms added on. So you get a core of rooms in the room block, 2 or 3, and then they add some rooms on, as the family grows, or as they don't want to use those central rooms anymore to live in. They use them as burial rooms. And so you don't see that, anything like that, at a place like Powers Ranch. You actually don't see it over in the Gila at all, much. And another difference between people living in the Mimbres Valley and people living to the west in the Gila and farther west at Powers Ranch.
So I think you had indicated that there might have been a period when there was abandonment, or not abandonment, but where they weren't using the site, and then they came back because there's a gap in the pottery sequence there. So could it be one of those places where, this is our homestead, it's an important place to maintain as a spot where you live, but you're not there all the time, so maybe they're circulating around?
Yeah, that's certainly possible. These people are agriculturalists, both in the Mimbres Valley and out in the Gila. They're living pretty much from agriculture. And, but in the Mimbres Valley, there's all of this superposition and stuff going on in the same place. Out in the Gila, I told you there are lots of small room blocks on each of the big sites and on the small sites as well. And it does suggest more movement. That is, if I build a 2-room block right here, but I don't add on to it, and I don't refurbish the floor, and I don't, build a different roof, then maybe I've gone for a while, and then I come back, and instead of reusing those 2 rooms, I build another 2 rooms someplace on the same site. So you don't get that continuity of, I would think, a family of some sort, a household, that you would see in the Mimbres Valley. I'm kind of out on a limb there, I'm speculating a bit. And so one of the points is that the people living in the Mimbres Valley and the people living out beyond the Mimbres Valley have different histories. They have different ways of being social, and they have different histories, but yet they're all still Mimbres. So.
You haven't found any communal structures out there, which is also interesting because you do have communal structures, not only in the Gila Valley, or in the Mimbres Valley, but in the Silver City area.
Yeah.
There are communal structures that they're not really kivas, but they're, well, okay, she wants to call them a kiva. We'll call them that. But there aren't the same sorts of communal practices in that area.
But the interesting thing about Mimbres is that the great kivas, we call them great kivas, like the kivas that you see up north, are not in the classic period. They get burned in the AD 900s. Some of them are rebuilt, but by the early 1000s, there are no great kivas. So there's no buildings in which large groups of people can gather. This is in the Mimbres Valley. And so the speculation is, well, they're gathering in plazas. And plazas, they're out there, they're kind of big blank spaces, they're not. But, it's hard for an archaeologist to interpret a plaza as a place that people would gather. But it's the only place that people could gather. But you get out to the Powers Ranch area, and I don't know of a site that has a great kiva, because most of them haven't been excavated. And so, but if you go, Cliff on the Gila River in New Mexico, the town of Cliff, It's right near the New Mexico-Arizona border. It's on the Gila River. There are 3 big sites, Mimbres classic pueblos there, and they have great kivas. So if people want it earlier than classic, we don't know if those are classic or not. If people at Powers Ranch wanted to do some sort of gathering ceremony, they wanted to participate in a great kiva thing, they would have had to go someplace else. But I don't know if those were the same time period or not.
So the time period when the people in Mimbres Valley were making the figures, the figurative pottery, they're doing whatever in plazas, not in the great kivas, right?
Yes, it
Or there's a continuity, or there's a overlap in time?
Yeah.
Because boldface,
Has
some figurative.
Has some figurative.
and those show up, I mean, we get
In the
bold,
800s.
yeah, we get boldface in
Yeah.
Tucson.
Yeah.
And we get some classic in Tucson, but we only get the geometrics, we don't get
Yeah.
the figures.
Figurative, yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. I want to put in a plug for legacy projects because this is a real good one. There are, if you go to any museum in southern Arizona or in New Mexico, anywhere in Arizona or New Mexico, you're going to find sites that were excavated by people like me and Rich and Chris and Paul probably.
I'm working on mine.
That have not been written up. You know, the stuff's been washed, it may be cataloged, it may be inventory, but nobody's written about it. So if anybody is interested in a project that'll take, 5 years, 6 years to work on, it's a good project to have, and I'm sure any any museum would be pleased to have you looking at their material. I know that, for instance, out in Cells, there's a project that's just waiting for somebody. There was a pot hunter that donated his collection to there, and they haven't cataloged any of it yet. It needs cataloging, and it would make some really great articles somewhere along the line. So I think we can open it for questions unless there was something else. Yes?
Why did you not expect very many projectile points at that site?
Because most classic member sites don't have many projectile points. And so, and this being a small site, I would have expected 20, 30 maybe. And so it was a real surprise to see 167. Is that an answer? No.
I just think, of how sparsely populated the landscape was and how intact the ecosystems were, that they probably furnish a lot of game.
The Maguion culture, which includes the Mimbres and the San Simon, are known for being more hunter. I mean, they did agriculture as well, but they presumably did more hunting than like the Hohokam did. And because of what you're saying, it's sparsely populated. You have the villages are spread out more. It's really good habitat for hunting. So it's possible it was just the environment that was letting them do that.
Certainly it's possible at Powers Ranch, and Powers, yeah, it was sparsely populated relative to the Mimbres Valley. And so that's a good point, that there might be more projectile points. On the other hand, these people are doing a lot of agriculture. And if they're doing a lot of hunting, then they're hunting out the big game pretty quickly. And so most of what we see in the faunal assemblage, which I didn't talk about, is rabbits, cottontails, especially at Powers Ranch. Very little big game. There is some, and it's pretty much all deer, as I remember it, archaeodactyls. I don't remember a big one, no. So early on in the occupation of the site, and the sites up and down the valley during the classic period, they would have hunted out the big game, even though there weren't so many people there. they lived on venison for a while, and then it was gone.
If you look at sites in Hohokam land, for instance, sites along the river here, like along the Santa Cruz, are gonna have less big game than sites that are like along the foothills of the Catalinas, where you have, there's a site over where Agua Caliente Park is that had, well, there's a burial there that had a bighorn sheep, a pronghorn, a mule deer, and a white-tailed deer in the burial. And the people there, I'm pretty sure, were hunting specialists. So, and I think that that's true also, that Rudy Ranch site that I mentioned before. They were doing, they had a lot of artiodactyls that you'd find. So the Hohokam, the fringes, the edges, the people that were in the environment, you know, foothills or mountain foothills, especially the taller, the bigger mountains, were doing quite a bit of hunting, and I think through the period too, because the site out at Agua Caliente dates to the 1200s, or 11 and 1200s, so it's possible, you know, to maintain it, but they did, if they were doing intensive agriculture anywhere, they kind of wiped out the big game.
Yeah.
They actually wiped out the cottontails, and went for jackrabbits after that, because they have different habitats that they like.
If they wiped out the big game, is that why maybe it was abandoned for that period of time?
Probably not, because they probably wiped out the big game, at least in the Mimbres Valley, long before the Classic period.
But in your area?
But in our area, don't know. And I don't remember the proportions of big game at Powers Ranch to proportions of big game at other classic sites, like in the Mimbres Valley. I just don't remember. So in sometime in the 1120s-ish, in the Mimbres Valley, many people go away. And Paul has made the argument that the environment was especially good for about 100 years there. And then the environment went back to normal, you know, touch and go, up and down. And people and there were a lot of people in the Mimbres Valley at that point. And so they all couldn't make a living, and they moved. At the same time, in the Gila Valley, around Powers Ranch, Mary makes the case that they also move or do something completely different, so we don't recognize them as classic members anymore. And they, but the carrying capacity in the Gila, with many fewer people, is much higher. There was no reason, if they were farmers, that they couldn't have stayed and continued to farm as they had always. But for some reason, their members, everything members goes away in the 1120s-ish. And so there's something social going on there.
Did they go down to Pakame?
No, they did not go to Pakame. Regardless of what Steve LeBlanc says, they did not go to Pakame. There's that pesky 100-year gap between 1130 and 1250, 1275. Well, you know, if they went to Pakame, they did a very long 100-year thing.
There is apparently, though, some DNA evidence from a couple of burials from the Mimbres Valley and Pakame, and associating it also with the Cora and the Huichol down in Nayarit.
Yeah.
So
There is that.
they're related. You had a question in the back.
Getting at the DNA analysis, you mentioned finding cremated remains and other remains. Have there been genetic analyses to trace? Because oftentimes, like, these people just didn't disappear, right?
No, they didn't.
No, they didn't.
They absolutely didn't disappear. We know they went somewhere, we just don't know where. The big problem with doing any kind of DNA analysis is that you have to get tribal approval of it, and for the inhumations, they were able to get the permission, and I don't know who.
That was a long time ago.
It was a while ago, yeah. Nowadays, the cremations would probably be, the consultants would probably be the Adam, and they're not gonna allow it. They don't want anybody doing any kind of destructive analysis of any kind with human remains. So you're not going to get it for a while from there.
Yeah.
We would love to be able to do that because you could solve a lot of questions if you could do the DNA analysis on cremations. You had a question?
That was kind of my question, what happened to these people? Like, it's pretty much accepted now that the Hohokam, the Hohokam are their descendants, but
Yeah,
the
it's
memories.
accepted by, it depends on who you talk to on that, and even which group of Adam you're talking to. The Akimel Adam say yes. According to a person I know who's doing intensive work with them, as he knows older informants, so anybody who's my age or older that he's working with says, no, those are not our ancestors. The Tama Adam have a pretty strong story that they came up and conquered the Hohokam. So, depends on who you talk to on that regard. Now, the Gila River folks and the people up on the Salt River say those are our ancestors. There's no doubt about it. And it could be that everybody's right on that, because the Hohokam in particular, and the Mimbres perhaps also, were a multi-ethnic group. I think we can pretty much say that they were. I think a fair number of Hohokam descendants are actually human people as well, the Kitsan, Maricopa, Cocopa people. Possibly, I talked to one Yavapai historian who said, well, some of them have to be Yavapai. And I said, why do they have to be Yavapai? And he says, we don't have any migration stories. We were always here. So he was taking that. It's possible that some of the Mimbres became Tarahumara or Waramari, maybe.
People have said that.
So that some people say the people of Pakime, that's what happened to them. But you know, when a people change their culture so much that you lose track of it, which is what happened not only with the Mimbres, but with the Hohokam. We lose track of that type of pottery making, the type of houses that they were making changed. Their site structure didn't change a lot. You still find some interesting structures on top of old Hohokam villages that, you know, we recognize as something called proto-historic, which is, I don't know what a good term for that is, but that dates the period from 1400 to 1700 in this area. But they're not making decorated pottery. They're probably still making a lot of woven stuff that's identifiable, but we don't see that at all unless they put it in a cave, and they weren't putting it in caves. So it isn't until 1700 that you start seeing anything in the way of decorated Agam pottery. Before then, the pottery that's made from 1400 to 1700 from the middle of Colorado all the way down to this area looks almost identical. It's built for, I think, quick transport.
Utilitarian.
It's utilitarian. It has a very specific kind of style to it. Shapes, probably small jars, not big jars, so built for transport. So I think they were doing an awful lot of stuff in basketry at that period. And it could be that that's what happened with the Mimbres. They became more mobile. If you're mobile, you know, you're not going to want something that breaks if you drop it to carry around if you have something important in it.
And not everybody left the Mimbres Valley in the 1120s. There are people still there. In fact, there are people there through the 1300s, but their materials look different. They look different in the 1200s, they look different in the 1300s. But clearly a lot of people did leave the valley. And I think a way to think about it is that families left, that people didn't just, thousands of people just didn't one day leave the valley. But instead, individual families who owned plots of land, agricultural land, looked around and said, things aren't as good as they were. Our land isn't yielding what it once did. We can make a living, but it's not as good. We're gonna move in with our cousins on the Rio Grande, one family. And then another family says, we're gonna move up to Zuni, because the Zunis see some descent from Mimbres. We're gonna move in with our cousins up at SUNY. We're gonna move in with our friends over by Phoenix. That kind of thing. So I don't think it was a mass migration. I think it was individuals making a decision about what they would do.
Has the tree ring lab yielded any studies that you've correlated with any of the events that you find in the archaeological record? Like climatic shifts or extended droughts and things like that in that area?
I'm gonna let Paul answer that question because he knows the environmental stuff better than I do.
When I wrote this 40 years ago, so keep that in mind. Correlate at the time the reserve tree ring with Mimbres flow, there's a fairly good correlation. And the idea is that the Mimbres, as Pat said, is a particularly good time, usually good time, and it wasn't a drought in the 1120s or 1130s. It just returned to a more natural, normal pattern. But by that time, Mimbres had expanded, and you have water communities in the upland areas where the agriculture isn't so good. And so, and Pat, you want to talk about this one thing that people who work in Mimbres see is that it's very inward looking. It looks like, because of probably the religious practices that are shown on the pottery, that are even more tightly connected. So when the people in the outlying areas are having trouble, that problem reverberates through the entire area. And so there is some environment. It's not drought, as people tend to think about it. My argument would be that it returned to a normal condition, but by that time the population had expanded, so the carrying capacity was a big problem. Not everybody buys that argument. I can't imagine why, but not everybody buys it.
Thank you, Paul.
Are you seeing Mimbres pottery in the SUNY and
No.
after that time period?
No. By 1130, there's virtually no Mimbres black and white pottery being made.
And nothing that they took with them to
You
know
see the
that they went-
iconography though. You see parrots, you see,
But painted different.
they're painted different, yeah, they don't look like you don't have the little guys carrying the parrots around and things like that. But you do see some of the same figures in that area.
There is some continuity. And there's continuity in the Hero Twins, which we haven't talked about, which Pueblo's recognized today. Before we end, I want to make a pitch for the University of Arizona Press. I'm not sucking up, but the University Press has been very willing to publish books like Powers Ranch, like the Maddox site, a site in the Mimbres Valley that has a lot of tree ring data in it, that has a lot of data in it. And these books are data rich. They have lots of tables in them. These are not bedtime reading.
Well, they are bedtime reading.
Yeah, they will put you to sleep. But these are important books, not only for us today practicing archaeology, but for archaeologists, Native Americans, other people interested 50 or 100 years from now. Our interpretations will change, but the data doesn't change. So kudos to the U of A Press. Also, they have just published yet another data-rich. If you're interested in small member sites, this book by Roger Anion and Steve LeBlanc just came out in 2024, I think, and it has all of the rest of our sites from the Mimbres Foundation excavations in the 1970s, among them small sites in the Mimbres Valley that a person could compare to Powers Ranch, for example, and many other sites. So, we love U of A Press.
Two points. One is the Maddox site is probably the most heavily studied, best classic Mimbres site since 1930.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing is, especially for Pat, who was the main author, worked on it for 40 years, these sites are heavily looted. And I mean, when Mimbres Foundation went to work, people said, "Don't go there. There's nothing left." I community bulldozing sites. And it's amazing what you've been able to learn from a horribly destroyed sites, which gives some hope for the future.
Yes, that's true. So Linda and I are here if you want to ask other questions, you want to talk about this, but thank you for coming.